former, I'll call it the former platform that they had put in front of the people of Ontario a number of weeks ago, the so-called People's Guarantee. We already knew that that had a multi-billion-dollar hole in it, that their former leader, Patrick Brown, and members of their caucus were either unwilling or incapable of explaining to the electorate how they planned, what they planned to cut, who they planned to harm, what they planned to put at risk in order to fill that multi-billion-dollar hole. Well, we saw all four of the candidates vying for that leadership, including Doug Ford, who ultimately has become their leader. We saw all of them go one step further and promise that if elected as leader and ultimately elected as premier, they would get rid of the carbon tax. But the carbon tax is exactly how the Conservatives had previously proposed to pay for some of the ongoing investments that they alleged that they'd be making.
And I think a personal income tax cut as well.
And also a personal income tax cut. So knowing that they already had to fill a significant hole in their plan in order to make the numbers work and to cut recklessly in order to make those numbers work, now we know they have to do that and go that much further. And again, the question I have, and I asked this when I was at the Conservative Convention, when they released the People's Guarantee in the first place, if you want to be a Conservative, if you want to take the province backward, if you want to make reckless cuts, that's your choice. But I believe in 2018, the people of this province deserve to know exactly what you would cut, who you would harm, and what you would put at risk. I think if you have the courage of your convictions, you should be able to level with the people of this province and be honest about what you plan to do. And we haven't seen it from Patrick Brown, and we have not yet seen it from Doug Ford as he's assumed the leadership of that party.
Well, so we had Doug Ford on this show a couple of weeks ago, and we touched on that subject, and his answer to me was that he is quite confident that he could find, so about $141 billion budget last year in Ontario, that in order to fill that $5 to $6 billion hole, that he can find 4% in budget efficiencies. We didn't dig too deep on what those efficiencies look like or where he may find them, but that would be his answer if he were here, I think, on filling that fiscal hole.
So there's a couple of challenges with what Doug Ford is suggesting. One is their hole is not $4 or $5 or $6 billion. It was north of $10 billion, closer to about $12 billion before Doug Ford and the rest of the candidates running for their leadership said that they would also get rid of the carbon tax. That number has now grown. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of a $16 billion hole in their plan right now. So when you're talking about that scale, that size of magnitude of cuts that would be required, it's unavoidable when you look at the provincial budget. It's unavoidable that you would have to cut in healthcare, you would have to cut in education, you would have to cut in protecting our environment. You'd have to cut back on infrastructure investments. You'd have to take a really serious look at firing teachers, doctors, nurses, and you don't have to take my word for it. Just a few days ago, an independent economist named Mike Moffat published an article in Maclean's magazine saying that he'd taken a look at what the four candidates, including Doug Ford, were promising to do should any one of them, and in this case, should Doug Ford become premier. And Mike Moffat's independent analysis said that at least 40,000 teachers, doctors, nurses, and other women and men who perform really core public services in all 444 communities across this wonderful province, at least 40,000 of them would be at risk of losing their jobs in order to make those numbers work. And it's not just about the jobs. I mean, that's critically important for those people and their livelihoods and their quality of life, but it's also what kind of horrendous ripple effect would that have on people across Ontario, lower income families, middle income families, young people. What kind of impact, what kind of ripple effect? It would be devastating, because the core services that we rely on as an enlightened, civilized province would be at risk. Healthcare, education, fighting climate change, protecting our environment, building the infrastructure that our economy depends upon so that it can continue to flourish. All of this is at risk, and all I would say to Doug Ford is just come clean, have the courage of your convictions, and admit who you're going to put at risk and who you're going to harm with your reckless plan.